Heyo, Weibo here, your least favorite degenerate, and today I'll be giving my thoughts on Persona 4, which I, had some thoughts on, albeit a bit exaggerated at times. Anyway, before we can get into it, I gotta do the obligatory disclaimer stuff right now. So, there will be spoilers throughout the entire video, so I highly encourage you to play this game beforehand, as I hold this game in an extremely high regard despite some of the issues I may have with it. Guys, it's on Steam for $20. It's a steal. Please do not let this shitty YouTube video made by a teenage degenerate be your experience with this truly amazing game. Anyway, here is where I should also state that I'm reviewing Persona 4 Golden, which is a remaster of the original game with additional content which I will also be including in this video. And finally, that everything I say in this video is my own goddamn opinion, and that everything here should be taken with a truckload of salt. With that out of the way, let's get into it. Like my other thoughts on video, link in the description if you haven't watched it, I'm gonna start with the opening, which I think is pretty mediocre, as while it does convey the game's general tone, I believe it does so worse than the original in practically every right. Especially when the original portrayed all the characters through a TV or media lens, which is integral to the story, and stuff like this is completely missed in the Golden intro in favor of showing off new content and the new character, which I find very unfortunate. Anyway, my thoughts of the track that accompany this intro is about the same, nothing really special, especially when compared to the original, which I think is way better. Well, since I've completely shot on the intro, I'll move on to something a little more positive, being the gameplay, which, get this, is really fucking fun to play. This might be me being conditioned to power through terrible gameplay for at least a decent story, Persona 1, but I really couldn't find a fault in the gameplay like I can very easily for Personas 1 through 3. And while we're on the subject, I'm a huge fan of the custom difficulty settings that are available in the PC port, where you can choose exactly how difficult the game is and for what reason. And yes, I did play on the lowest difficulty possible. I have to record the entire goddamn game, give my hard drive a break. Anyway, in case you aren't familiar with the mechanics of Persona 3 through 5, here they are. The game works a lot like a typical JRPG. However, you, your teammates, and enemies all have elemental affinities which can be exploited. Successfully doing this rewards the player or enemy with a one more, giving them an opportunity for another attack. If all enemies are downed in battle, you're able to initiate an all-out attack for massive damage. Anyway, with that out of the way, at least gameplay-wise, I'd rate this game second only to its successor, Persona 5, which, you know, has some really great combat additions and changes that I'd like to talk about when I finally get to reviewing Royal, when it finally comes to PC. Right, Atlas? Right? Please? Oh boy, looks like I've finished up the gameplay section. You know what that means. Time to write another 10 pages explaining the story in great detail. Memes aside, we start off in a mysterious limo with even more mysterious people, being Igor, the one with the long nose, and Margaret. Here we're asked for our name, and like the capital G gamer I am, I of course put down a racial slur because racism is definitely funny. Anyway, after that, we start off as a transfer student heading for Inaba, a small countryside place where we'll stay with our uncle, Dojima, and his daughter Nanako for a year. On our way to the car, we meet the new character who gives us a piece of paper back after dumbass over here drops it. Anyway, on the way to Dojima's house, we stop at the gas station, shake the attendant's hand, and walk around town before coming to our new home. Here, we learn that Daddy Dojima, yes, I'm gonna call him that and there's nothing you can do about it, is so caught up in his work as a detective that he barely has any time for his own daughter. After he leaves, we watch a special on TV about a huge affair scandal going on between Taro Namatame and Mayumi Yamano. Remember those names, they're gonna be important later. Once we finish dinner, we head straight to bed like a good little boy, and find ourselves in a mysterious mysterious foggy area which holds a shadowy figure at the end who speaks about finding the truth and that we will meet again. We then wake up and head to school after passing by the dumbass who thought going 70 on a bicycle was a smart idea. Anyway, once we arrive at school, we meet a couple of our classmates, being Chie, Yukiko, and Yosuke, the same dumbass we met earlier. After school, an announcement comes on the PA system telling all students to stay inside the building until further instruction.
Class of 2022, I regret to inform you, God has fucking died. I was balling too goddamn hard. His ankle snapped in half like a goddamn Twinkie when I walked upon that court. Sorry, class. Religion is no longer valid. Over.
And, after some time passes, we're allowed to leave. On our way back home, we pass by a crime scene and get to see Daddy Dojima and his associate Adachi at work investigating a recent murder case. Once we get home, we learn about Mayumi Yamano's death on the news. Hey, I remember that name. But more importantly, the strange circumstances around said death, because Yamano's body was found dangling on top of an antenna, and even weirder is that the cause of death can't be determined. After that tidbit of information, we pass by Yosuke, while heading to the school again and help him up this time. Anyway, after school, everyone except Yukiko meets up at Junes before Yosuke gets distracted by the presence of Saki, one of Yosuke's co-worker who he obviously has a thing for. Anyway, once she leaves, we learn about a rumor being spread around by students that if you look into a shut-off TV at midnight while it rains, you'll be able to see your soulmate, and eventually you agree to try it out. Upon returning home, we see the girl from earlier on TV, as she was the one who initially discovered the body. After that's all done, we finally try the TV rumor out, and to our surprise, we're able to see a figure on the screen. Just not in great detail. Being intrigued by this, we instinctively reach out for the TV only to find our hand went right through. This then causes us to pull away quickly and decide to tell everyone about it tomorrow. The next day, we all discuss about what we saw the night before, but as it turns out, we all saw the same person on the TV. This is where we remember being inside the TV. However, when we bring it up, they of course don't believe us, but still humor us enough to take us to the electronics aisle at Junes. When we arrive, we stick our hand into the TV and everyone is shocked, of course, and being panicked, they all end up falling into the TV world. Once inside, we decide to look around a bit and end up finding this really creepy room comprised of ripped posters and a noose. After a bit, we all become exhausted and decide to try and find a way out of here. On our way, we meet a mysterious bear who seems to live here. He also tells us that someone's been throwing people into this world before helping us leave. Upon return to our world, Yosuke recognizes a poster just like the one in the creepy room, it being one of Misuzu Hiragi, one of the people involved in the affair scandal. Once we return home, Daddy Dojima asks us about Saki and tells us that she was the one who discovered the first body, which unknown to him we already know. We then hear that the first victim was staying at the Amagi Inn before her death. Anyway, we're suddenly hit with a major case of ligma and have to go to bed early. The next day, we have an assembly at school to reveal the sudden death of Saki Konishi. After the assembly, we all meet up and Yosuke tells us he saw Saki on the Midnight Channel last night and suggests that Yamano was also on the same channel before her death as well. After that, he suggests that they were both in the TV world at some point and runs off to Junes. Once catching up, Yosuke gives us a club and Chie the rope so that they can get out without Teddy, which is the mysterious bear I mentioned earlier. I neglected to mention his name, I'm sorry. However, as soon as we enter the TV, the rope breaks, leaving us alone in this. Well, lucky for us, we find Teddy relatively quick, but then he starts accusing us of being the ones who are throwing people into the TV. But after some talking, we convince him of our investigation, and he agrees to let us out on the condition we investigate who the killer really is. Yosuke ends up getting a little fed up, so he rips off Teddy's costume to find that he's actually hollow inside. Well, after that's over, Teddy gives us glasses that removes the fog from our sight and leads us to a place the last person was at. Upon arriving, we're swarmed with shadows at the doorway, and we awaken to our persona, Izanami. After obliterating these easy enemies, we make our way into Saki's family liquor store to investigate. We then start to hear unknown voices as we approach a table full of photos on it. All of a sudden, we are able to hear her voice and she reveals her true feelings about Yosuke. That she fucking hated him. This, of course, gets him all riled up and we suddenly hear another Yosuke mocking him. He then states that he's tired of everything and reveals all of his biggest insecurities right in front of us. Yosuke vehemently denies that he is him, so it transforms into a massive shadow that we then have to fight. After we defeat him, Yosuke is finally ready to accept his shadow, and through his acceptance, it becomes his persona, Jiraiya. After this encounter, we speculate that the others who were thrown in were killed by their other selves. And on our way to the exit, we also speculate that we can save people just the way we saved Yosuke. And then we decide that we've done enough for today and leave the TV world. As we're heading home, we meet Yukiko and talk for a bit before heading home and seeing her again on the TV interview, where she is taken over as manager of the Amagi Inn. Oh, hey, looks like it's raining tonight. It's time to check the TV. And it looks like we can see a woman on the program. The next day, we meet Yosuke on our way to school and start our first social link. Anyways, after school, Chie comes to tell us that she hasn't seen Yukiko all day. However, when she calls at the inn, Yukiko answers and our worries are swayed for now. Just to make sure, we all head for the TV at Junes to ask Teddy if he sensed anyone. And to our relief, the answer is no. We then agree to watch the Midnight Channel that night to make sure we're just worried over nothing. After that, we see Daddy Dojima and Adachi at a crime scene where they discuss the lack of evidence on the case. Anyway, it's Midnight Channel time, baby, and today, we see Yukiko clear as day, but she's acting extremely out of character. Once the show is over, we get a call from Yosuke confirming that it was indeed Yukiko we saw, and tells us to meet up at Junes tomorrow. Once we arrive, Yosuke decides to pull up with 2 blades in hands, beckoning us to choose one, and so we do. However, in a totally unpredictable turn of events, we end up at the police station for having weapons in a public area. On our way out, we meet Adachi, and he ends up slipping and telling us that Yukiko has gone missing. Anyway, we end up meeting Chie, and she's surprised that we already know Yukiko's gone, and suggests we go get new weapons. Once we're at the shop, I definitely used the money Yosuke gave me to buy weapons and did not pocket the money instead, and you can't prove otherwise. We all agree to meet up at Junes, but on the way, a door appears, and a key glows in our pocket, so we enter it. Once we do, we're in the Velvet Room again, where we're told of our ability to use multiple personas, or also known as the wild card. We also meet a familiar face, being the girl, Marie, from the very beginning of the game, who is now residing here. Now that we're out of the Velvet Room, we head over to Junes to meet up with the others. We all then head over to the TV world, where Teddy confirms that Yukiko is here, and leads us to a castle that we saw on the Midnight Channel. Upon arriving here, Chie gets a little too excited and runs off without us, leaving us to catch up. Once we reach the second floor and meet up with Chie, we start hearing Yukiko's voice describing her hatred for her name and how it represents how worthless she apparently is. Then she goes on to compare herself to Chie, who she views as better than her. Suddenly, we hear Chie's voice as well, however, it has a different story to tell. Shadow Chie goes on about how Yukiko stated is what she wants, and that she thrives off her dependence upon her. Of course, all of this causes her to deny herself, and we gotta fight another shadow. Upon defeat, Chie finally accepts her shadow as a part of herself, and through that, obtains her persona, Tomoe. We then go back home, as awakening to a persona is exhausting, and Chie needs some rest. Once we return, Shadow Yukiko greets us at floor 2, and then goes on about our hunt for her prince and runs off. We then chase her up to floor 5, where she drops a mini-boss on us and leaves. After defeating it and going up to floor 8, we finally meet her and the real Yukiko. The shadow keeps on going on and on about her prince taking her far away from her unhappy life, and says that Chie is her prince, or at least was, as apparently she can no longer save her. She then directly states that this is about her inheriting the inn, and she wants to be no part in it. This is where Yukiko starts denying herself, and of course the shadow goes berserk, leaving us to fight it. Once we've taken care of her shadow, Yukiko finally faces and ultimately accepts it as a part of herself, and in the process obtains her persona, Konoha Sakuya. After that, we all ask her who did this to her, and unfortunately for us, she can't remember it at all. Once that's all over with, we no longer have any business in the TV world, so we all leave. Once Yukiko recovers, we all go over the case at Junes and try and find a correlation. After a bit, we come up with a theory that the murderer is targeting women associated with the affair scandal. As we're discussing all of this, Adachi passes by and tells us what they're thinking, which is that Saki was killed to be silenced, and that there was something that only she would have understood at the scene. After that, we all head into the TV to investigate and to introduce Yukiko as our new teammate. Once we come back home, Daddy Dojima promises Nanako that he'll be able to get off work for Golden Week and starts planning planning a family outing. However, when the time comes, we find out that a colleague of his got sick, and now he can't come, which of course saddens the already lonely Nanako. Chie then comes and invites us to go to Junes, so everyone meets up to cheer up Nanako. A while later, we're watching a TV report on a local biker gang when we see a person yelling at the camera crew, and Daddy Dojima tells us that that kid's name is Kanji Tatsumi, and that he's been in trouble for a while. The next day is a rainy one, so you know what that means. Midnight Channel time, baby. Anyway, when we check the TV, we see a figure appearing to be a young man and call Yosuke about it, and sure enough, he saw the exact same thing. We then agree to meet up and discuss this the next day. We all firstly agree that our first theory was incorrect, as this time a guy showed up instead of a girl. They then state that since they couldn't see him clearly, then he must still be safe for now, as that was the case for Yukiko. However, we're all still dry on evidence dictating who the young male we saw was, so we're forced to wait. When we come home, we decide to check the Midnight Channel again, and this time we see a figure fighting something unknown. But with a second glance, we recognize him from the TV report that aired a couple days prior as Kanji. The next day, we all meet up to discuss Kanji and decide to meet him at his family's store. Upon arrival, we see a detective talking to his mother, who leaves as we enter the store. They then recognize a material as the same one of that scar snoof that we found in the creepy room earlier. They then leave the shop and spot Kanji talking to the detective from earlier, discussing a meetup date for something, and Kanji drops some hints if you know what I mean. Anyway, he spots us looking at him and chases us away before we can talk to him. Once we're a safe distance away, we all decide to try and get more information tomorrow by eavesdropping on them. Yosuke and Chie then follow Kanji and the detective before they get found out. They then say some things that make Kanji visibly uncomfortable, and this entire section may or may not be a massive hint to Kanji's major insecurities. This then prompts Kanji to chase them all the way back to the textile shop where we're waiting. Here, Yosuke asks him if anything strange has happened, and Kanji takes it as if we think he's strange, which prompts him to chase us away. After a day of failed warning attempts, we decide to go home and check the Midnight Channel again, and before the show even starts, we get a call from Yukiko that Kanji's gone missing. Then, the Midnight Channel confirms our assertion of this as Kanji appears on it clear as day, albeit in a very homoerotic fashion. The next day, we all agree that was unmistakably Kanji and that we have to go rescue him. Once we enter the TV, we confirm the situation with Teddy, but this time we need some more info so Teddy can accurately tell where he is. So we go back to ask people about him. Eventually, we find out from the detective that something was strange about Kanji and that he may have some sort of complex. With a bit of that info, Teddy's able to sniff him out all the way to the sauna. Now, before I talk any further, I'd like to reiterate that each place is based off of the feelings of each victim, the sauna being the culmination of Kanji's. With that out of the way, it becomes more and more obvious that insecurity I talked about earlier is a sexuality. If you somehow missed all of the signs, there was a literal physical sign on floor 3 right above Kanji that spells it out clear as day, and afterward, he runs away to a higher floor. We meet him again on floor 7 where he drops a mini-boss on us and runs away, and after beating it, we keep on moving forward. We then finally catch up to Kanji on floor 11, where his shadow talks about being himself and how he always wants to be accepted for who he is. This, of course, upsets Kanji, and he vehemently attacks and rejects his shadow, which, at this point, we already know what's gonna happen next. Anyway, once the boss was pummeled, although initially angrily rejective of himself, he comes to accept that this is a part of him, and through the process, he gains his persona, Take Mikazuchi. I'm sorry, I fucking butchered that. Now that he's safe, we all leave the TV world. Here, he also explains to us that he was extremely interested in sewing as a kid, and that his interest got him ridiculed by practically everyone. Although, not directly stated, it's highly likely that this is what pushed Kanji to act as he does nowadays. Finally, we get to ask him about his kidnapping, where, to no one's surprise, he can't remember shit. We all then head to Junes to further discuss the case when Kanji brings an important piece of evidence to us, being a piece of paper full of TV listings when each victim showed up on air. Anyway, after some time has passed, we see a report on TV about an idol called Rise Kujikawa, who is taking a break and has gone to live with her grandmother in Inaba. The next day, we all discuss what was on the report yesterday and agree that she could possibly be the next target for the murders. On the next rainy night, we check the Midnight Channel channel to see if Rise is on, and while we couldn't see in great detail, it's a fair assumption to believe it's her. We then decide to pay a visit to her grandma's tofu shop and make sure to tell her about the potential of her getting kidnapped after Yosuke fanboys over her. Anyway, after we leave, Daddy Dojima and Adachi come to tell her about the recent murders, and she tells them that we've already warned her, which makes Daddy Dojima really concerned. That night, we have a very tense dinner and then check the Midnight Channel to confirm that Rise is definitely in danger. The next day, we all meet up at Junes yet again, and they decide to stake out Rise's place until the killer arrives. While they're out shopping for supplies, they meet Adachi and have them join him. After a while, a suspicious individual shows up, and after being chased down, he's taken into custody by Adachi. I think it's obvious to all of us that he is indeed not our killer. When we come back, Rise's apparently gone missing, so we all go around searching for her to no avail. Well, shit. Guess we gotta go to the TV world yet again, and just to make sure, we all check the Midnight Channel that night, and as expected, we see Rise clear as day. However, the manner in which we see her is, well, explicit to say the least. We all agree to go to the TV, but Teddy's dumb and bad, so we have to go get some clues so his stupid nose will work. Anyway, once we get to the strip club, yes, this section of the video game is a fucking strip club, and yes, I'm too fucking stupid to understand what it's supposed to symbolize. Okay, that may have been a fat fucking lie, because I believe that this was a target at her insecurities regarding attention in the media. As stated before, she's an idol, so I believe that this is a statement on how she desperately hates the attention she gets but also can't live without it. Anyway, now we're on to the final god damn it, I'm closing my fucking door. And I'm taking out the lotion. Alright, you guys can guess what's next. Once she finally faces herself and accepts that this is a part of her, she obtains her persona, Himihiko. However, this isn't where this dungeon ends. In fact, we're just getting started, as Teddy starts to become extremely insecure about his unknown identity, and thus spawns his own shadow. His shadow starts talking about there is no him to find and that he simply is what he is, and that there's no point of trying. Of course, this heavily upsets Teddy and he denies his own shadow, thus having us fight it with our new navigator, Rise. After we pummel with the shadow, Teddy comes to accept that this is a part of him and, in the process, attains his persona, Kintoki Doji. I fucking butchered that again. It's gonna happen more often, please ignore it. Once that happens, we're finally done and head back home for a well-deserved rest. Except for Teddy, who decides to train hard while we're gone. Now that we've saved Rise, all we gotta do is wait for confirmation from the Midnight Channel. And sure enough, when we check the Midnight Channel, no one shows up since we rescued Rise on time. However, despite our efforts, a body still shows up in the same deranged fashion as the first two. This, of course, confuses everyone, as not only does the body not belong to Rise, but also, nothing showed up on the Midnight Channel like the other murder attempts. Our first instinct is to check with Teddy that no one showed up in the TV world, and he does confirm this information, just in a bit of an odd manner considering the situation. Anyway, we're now left to ponder why the murderer ditched their traditional method and come up with the facts that we've successfully thwarted their attempts 3 times in a row now, so it's not completely unreasonable for them to ditch the method. On a completely different note, for some reason, Teddy's getting really hot, so he takes off his bearsuit to reveal that he's grown an entire human fucking body inside. What the fuck? Well, getting back on track, we head over to Rise's to check up on how she's doing, and right in front of the shop we meet the detective yet again. He then introduces himself as Naoto Shirogane and reveals to us that he's on track with our findings, without having any knowledge of the TV world at all. He then leaves, and Rise takes his place, and we all leave for the shrine where she tells us the same as the other victims' account in regards of very unclear memory of the kidnapping. We all eventually meet up at Junes again to discuss the case further before Naoto shows up and tells us that the police have found a suspect and that he's soon to be apprehended. After a while, we find ourselves at Junes yet again, this time discussing how the case has come to an end, when Adachi loudly complains about losing the suspect. And even more time passes, we decide to check the Midnight Channel just to be safe, when we see this kid clear as day, taunting us, saying stuff like, "Try and catch me." It also doesn't help that this guy looks awfully familiar to the description of the suspect that we've been given, and we all agree to go after him in the TV world. However, we yet again need to collect info on him before tracking him down, and after losing my sanity over the course of a couple days before budging and using a guide, we come back to apprehend our killer. Welcome to the twisted world of Mitsuo's mind. One that likens the killing of innocents to a game. Although pretty obvious and not subtle in the slightest, I've gotta say that the visual metaphor perfectly encapsulates the type of person we're dealing with here. And trust me, it only gets more chilling the further you go in. Let's start with floor 2. As the inner thought, we hear something hurt Mitsuo, as he is called worthless and knocked down like nothing but a condemned enemy in his game. On floor 3, we get a description of him waking up and sleeping through police sirens and being told about his deplorable action by an unknown third party. Floor 4, we get an RPG-esque description of the first murder, depicting Yamano as an enemy. But what's really jarring is the level up increases, as well excitement increasing is something to be expected from someone this deranged. It's quite a shocker to see an emptiness stat in his mind, and one that increased from his slaughter, albeit at a rate much lower than excitement. I personally believe that this shows some sort of divide within him, one at least existed at the beginning and may have been corroded over time. The next floor, we get something eerily similar, this time being about Saki. However, the stat increases show a lot more this time around, with 1, none of them being a positive change, and 2, these stats increasing by a large amount, with sadness and emptiness consuming him, which may at first glance indicate a sense of guilt, but I believe that this is instead the adverse reaction to killing that makes him so much more likely to do it again, as he slowly loses what makes someone human. Floor 6 is quite the contrast, as this one is showing off his reaction to the first victim being saved, and by extension, how his insanity is taking the limelight. Also take note of how the speaker is referred to as hollow voice, as to indicate his utter emptiness. Hey, emptiness was a stat mentioned earlier, look at that, how funny. The rest of the floors are just a continuation of his growing insanity as he slowly starts to lose it and starts to revel in what he's considered his accomplishments. Well, that just leaves us with this final section. Once we enter, the atmosphere is immediately different, with the real and Shadow Mitsuo being both so deranged it's hard to tell them apart. However, the real one does get tired of his shadow quickly and rejects him, causing yet another easy W for the investigation team. What happens next is far more interesting. Instead of him accepting his shadow, it simply disappears after he openly shows pride in what he's done. This could be to show just how much of a monster he was, as instead of mostly being ashamed of his other side, Mitsuo instead revels in it. We then finally get to drag him out and give him over to the authorities so that these charades can finally be put to an end. With the culprit finally in police's hands, everyone decides to celebrate and to fully enjoy the remaining of their summer. Once summer ends, we're greeted by none other than Naoto himself, and he tells us that he'll be attending our school from now on. That aside, you've probably noticed by now that this video is not even fucking close to being done. This is because it turns out we end up seeing Naoto on the TV. This, of course, has the investigation team meet up the following day to discuss these inconsistencies, and they come up with a theory that Mitsuo was only responsible for their teacher's death, as it's the only one in the series of murderers with a discernible cause of death. Even with all of this, some of the teams still have their doubts, so we wait until the next Midnight Channel where we see Shadow Naoto clear as day. Our next action is to, of course, go into the TV world to save him. Once we arrive, we first know the form of the place has taken, which is a secret laboratory. Anyway, once we enter, we get a better look at what's going on in here. As the deeper we go, the more we hear that our existence here is not wanted in any way, as opposed to the other places where it's almost like the shadows wanted us there. This is almost like he's saying, leave me alone, I don't want and or need your help. Despite the continued pleas for us to leave, we keep on going until we reach Shadow Naoto. Once we arrive, we notice a massive contraption behind them and that the real Naoto has expected our arrival, as he knew that he would be kidnapped and purposefully accepted an interview and got on TV to do so. Anyway, he then goes on about how his shadow acts quite childish and threatens to leave when Shadow Naoto pipes up, begging him not to go. This is where Shadow Naoto starts crying about always being left alone, in which Naoto responds that he is not like him. This is where the shadow flips a switch and suddenly speaks in a serious tone, telling Naoto that he is him, and that how he's acting is how Naoto feels deep down. He then rants on and on about how he's a child, he's never treated seriously, in fact, he's seen as extremely disposable by most, and at least for now, there's nothing he can do about it. He then goes on about how his body alteration process is finally ready, and asks Naoto if he has any objections. To this, Naoto screams at his shadow to stop, in which it responds by poking at Naoto's worst insecurity. Not the fact that he's a child, but in actuality that he is not a he. And because of that, she'll never be seriously accepted as a detective, no matter what she does or how hard she tries. Naoto responds by telling the shadow to stop throwing a tantrum, when it responds back, retorting that she's been told that exact phrase by people who would have never accepted her, and now here she stands, emulating the same damn thing. Naoto then denies her shadow yet again, but when Chie tells her not to say it, Kanji interrupts, saying that we need to let her get it all out, and we'll just do our job and kick the shadow's ass. Honestly, couldn't have said that better. Once we beat the shadow, Naoto confronts it and tells us of how she's admired the detective profession as her late parents once did, and how she would secretly aid in her grandfather's investigations. She then goes on about how she feared that since her status of a child already offended many she worked with, if it was found out that she was a woman, she would have never had a hope of being taken seriously. She then faces her shadow directly and apologizes for ignoring its existence, finally accepting it as a part of her. And through the process, she obtains her persona, Sukuna Hikona. We then, of course, leave the TV world. When we get back, we're met with Daddy Dojima on the couch and a drunk Adachi at the table who both inform me about how Naoto has come back after being missing for a while. He then rambles that they still got no proof of any murders Mitsuo committed besides the one of Muraoka, the unnamed teacher I mentioned earlier. Nothing really of note happens until October 20th, where we get a note delivered that simply states, "Don't rescue anymore." This is, of course, shocking as hell, and we decide to share the contents with the rest of the team the following day. But before that, we get a cutscene awfully reminiscent of Death Note, where a man is frantically writing things down in a notebook whilst watching the TV. Anyway, when they get to see the notes, Naoto instantly recognizes that instead of the content of the notes, the fact that it got delivered straight to our front door is more frightening. We also agree to not show it to Daddy Dojima, as if he were to catch wind that we were on the case, then our opportunities to continue our investigation would be effectively crippled. After a while, we're watching a TV report about a politician who's visited the region to talk about the recent and never-ending fog that's plagued Inaba. In the report, it's mentioned that he interviewed a little girl, and Nanako remembers that he visited her school to interview the children. A couple days later, and we get a midnight channel yet again, but unfortunately this time we aren't able to see the image clear enough to say anything yet. When we all meet up the next day, it's all the same except for Teddy, who says he saw someone short. With our hand basically tied behind our backs, we have to resort to waiting like always. However, it isn't much of a long wait until we get another warning letter from the killer, this time stating, "If you don't stop, this time someone close will be put in and killed." It looks like luck really isn't on our side since Daddy Dojima sees this and immediately interrogates us. Without many other choices, we tell him the truth, which he doesn't believe, so he takes us to the police station until we're willing to talk. Teddy and Yosuke are at Junes while this is all happening and decide to call Nanako to tell her they're coming over, and are shocked when she tells them where we and Daddy Dojima are, so Yosuke immediately calls the others. Cut back to us alone in an interrogation room, and with the TV right there, we're able to watch the Midnight Channel, where we're absolutely sure we see none other than Nanako. Luckily, everyone else was watching too, and as soon as Naoto saw it, she starts running for our household. This is where Yosuke, Teddy, and Kanji finally arrive at the station, and run by Daddy Dojima while making it to the room. Here, Yosuke tells everyone about Nanako's disappearance, to which Naoto confirms it over the phone. Daddy Dojima then immediately gets the other hesitant police on it, and leaves the room to go search for her. Once the others arrive, this leaves us and Adachi, where we explain the situation and go over the stipulations that make our killer. Firstly, it would have to be someone Nanako knows, as she's known to never open the door to strangers. And secondly, the culprit would not only have to have a car big enough for a TV to fit inside, since everyone has reported being thrown in mere minutes after being kidnapped, but also a car that wouldn't be suspicious to drive around people's houses. With this selection, we believe that a delivery truck would meet all these requirements, and lo and behold, on the list of suspects is Taro Namatame, not only connected to the first case, but also someone who recently started work for a delivery company. Once we figure this out, we all leave, with Adachi going to tell Daddy Dojima about our new clue. Daddy Dojima then gives chase to our perpetrator after spotting him and gets into a pretty big accident. Once we arrive at the scene, we come face to face with a hopeless Dojima and a van devoid of anything but a flat screen TV and a notebook. Naoto then reads the content of said notebook, which is a list of all the victims and their home addresses. With this, we decide to give trace to Namatame as well as save Nanako the next day, when we all arrive at one of the best parts of the game: heaven. Oh boy, do I have a lot to say about this place. I guess we can start with the most obvious and work our way down. Firstly, the design is a far cry from what we're used to. Instead of the dark and or gloomy area with either artificial or minimal lighting, we get an open, beautiful landscape with blooming flowers and vines to complement the architecture. Then we realize that this is like a fantasy depiction of heaven, which, since this is a place of Nanako's most inner thoughts, it strikes in a painful spot to realize that this is a massive embodiment of Nanako's grief for her deceased mother. Well, with the visuals aside, the theme of this place is the only one in the game with lyrics, and with lyrics comes analysis of said lyrics. It is what I would say if the song didn't speak clearly enough on its own merits without me muddying it up and probably fucking up the explanation. So instead, have a neat little thing I'm probably gonna edit in here. Anyway, we should probably take a look at the inside of the dungeon now. At first, we're only able to barely make out Nanako's voice, but after a couple floors, we're able to hear her reminisce about her mother. This is also about where Rise starts to detect another presence along with Nanako, and the fact that it's most likely Namatame urges us to hurry onward. From then on, we hear Namatame's voice instead with each floor, just showing how warped his worldview truly is. He keeps on going on and on about saving Nanako, in which you don't need to be a genius to figure out what he means by saving. Once we make it to the top, we're met with Namatame holding Nanako hostage. When we question him, he only goes on rambling his same nonsense, even having the gall to say, "You're the ones I saved," to us. Once he looks distracted, we make a break for it and quickly grab Nanako from his grubby hands. However, he then loses it and transforms into Kuni no Sagiri. When we enter the fight, I immediately was attracted to the boss design, as I believe it represents his distorted worldview quite perfectly. Here he is, as this massive monster, wearing a massive shirt marked with peace and love, almost as if this is his cover in his own mind to justify what horrendous acts he has committed. Anyway, after an embarrassing number of failed attempts, we're finally able to get both Nanako and Namatame out of the TV world and into the hospital for treatment. Some time then passes, and fog starts settling into the Inaba region, which usually marks when the victim would have died had we not saved them. The next morning, however, the fog still hasn't lifted. More importantly, we read that the news about Namatame is now public, and that they plan to convict him once he recovers, even though it may be difficult to do so on such rocky conditions. We then go see Nanako at the hospital, who, even in a bad disposition as she is right now, she seems to be getting better. On a different note, the fog still hasn't passed after a while, and Kanji discovers that the glasses used for clearing the fog in the TV world suddenly work here. This starts speculation that the fog is actually spilled from the TV world, and we then mainly ignore these concerns and focus on something a little more cheerful, being getting gifts for Nanako for when she makes a recovery. While we're shopping, Teddy asks us if he can stay, and we all answer that he can, and then ask why would he ask us such a thing. Teddy reveals that he, too, feels incredibly guilty about Nanako, and we all comfort him. However, we then get interrupted by a call from Adachi informing us that Nanako's condition has suddenly taken a turn for the worst and tells us to come immediately. When we arrive, the doctor ushers us, and only us, into the hospital room. This is where Nanako lies, looking as hopeless as possible, when the rest enter the room regardless. Unfortunately, just as she flatlines in the hospital bed, everyone is suddenly hit with a massive wave of grief and anger, and when Daddy Dojima leaves, he doesn't head for his room. Daddy Dojima is then stopped and dragged off by officers guarding Namatame's room, leaving it wide open for us. When we enter, we catch him trying to run off, and then the Midnight Channel turns on, revealing Namatame's true feelings. That he knew damn well what he did, and that he'll get away with it for sure. This causes rage so uncontrollable that half of the investigation team wants to throw him into the TV, which, being tempting as hell, we feel like something's off. Right now, we can't exactly pinpoint it, but we would be missing something if we gave into our emotions and killed Namatame. After a bit, we finally manage to calm everyone down, and Naoto makes the realization that we've never bothered to interrogate Namatame for his side of the story. It is this realization that prompts the completion of the investigation team's social link, and it being reborn as the new Seekers of Truth one. Now, I'm not usually one to get into the stuff, but I couldn't help but notice that the investigation team's social link was that of the Fool, before being reborn into the Seekers of Truth, which is of the Judgment Arcana. I believe that is there to show their growth in an additional, more subtle way. Anyway, we're then forced to leave as the police have finally come back. Right outside the room, we mull over the facts, and we start doubting we have all the information, as even with our current answer, some pieces still don't fit into place. Once we're done in here, we see Teddy in a place shrouded with fog, where he depresses over the unfortunate circumstances of late. When we go to visit Nanako's room one last time, we discover that she's come around, as unlikely as that is. And now that I'm the subject, I'd like to mention that if you choose to abandon the truth and push Namatame in, Nanako never recovers, which I'd like to say is a very nice way of reinforces the game themes about pursuit of truth through a web of lies. Anyway, after hearing the good news, we go to bed that night and are greeted by Igor in the Velvet Room, where he reminds us of how far we've come and simply asks us if we will be able to solve this mystery. He then talks about the limo's destination in relation to our journey, and you are reminded of your decision. The next day, we all meet up and go over the facts when Naoto mentions that back in the TV world, he mentioned that he saved us, which wouldn't be true if he honestly equated saving to murder. Then we look at the letters through the same lens. It wouldn't make sense for him to state things like don't rescue anymore or put them in and kill. We then decide to hurry and get his thoughts before he gets transferred to another hospital. When we make it to his room, we ask him to tell the story, and which he does. According to Namatame, he went home after the affair scandal and that he decided to try out the Midnight Channel rumor, and when a drunk Namatame saw Yamano on the screen, he reached out for it and found that he was able to stick his hand inside the TV. After that, he was absolutely shocked to hear about Yamano's death and correlated the appearance to the murder pretty quickly. So when it happened the second time, he went to warn Saki, which ultimately didn't do much as his pleas fell on deaf ears. Then, when the third time came around with Yukiko, he decided he needed to do something, and thought about hiding the people he saw inside of the TV world. He then reveals his regret when he kidnapped Nanako and admits that that is where he started to slowly doubt himself and his mission. As our limited time starts to come to a close, he begs us to find the real killer, and we oblige him. The next day, we start an investigation all across town, but even with all of our hard work, we find nothing. That night, we decide to mull things over with our killer checklist, which is 1. The killer must have a connection with both Yamano and Saki, and 2, be in a position to observe our actions at least periodically. After giving it some thought, a name suddenly appears in our mind, and everything seems clear now. That name being Toru Adachi. When everyone inspects it, it all lines up, since he was connected to the first 2 cases by nature of being in the police force, and that he would constantly check up on us throughout the game, and occasionally blurt out something to throw us off the trail. With our suspect in mind, we decide to come face to face with him to confirm our suspicions. When we meet him at the hospital, he's already acting suspicious by trying to demean our claims and attempting to run from the scene when he makes one fatal error. He then says, "We already know Namatame is the one who put them all in. He fucked up." And Naoto doesn't skip a beat to ask him how Adachi knew the methods of the murderer throwing people into TVs, and knowing how utterly fucked he is, he makes a break for it. When we eventually catch up to him, he's nowhere to be found. However, there is a TV in which he most likely jumped into to escape. We then decide to start our search for him the following day. Before that, we meet Teddy again in the Velvet Room, where he reveals that he's come to know who he is, a shadow. This revelation, along with Nanako's death, hit Teddy hard, but it does get better when you inform him that Nanako actually ended up pulling through. We then cheer Teddy up and help him come to terms with who he really is and complete his social link. The next day, we search long and hard, but ultimately only get a faint understanding where he is. So when we return home, it's quite a massive shock to see him back. And with Teddy informing everyone else about who he is and coming to terms with it, we all give chase to Adachi one last time with more determination than ever before. When we reach Adachi, we find ourselves in the same creepy room from the beginning of the game. Adachi then speaks of his horrendous crimes, and to say that he sugarcoated them would be an understatement. He openly speaks about how the first 2 victims deserved it over and over until we get to the topic of our kidnappings, to which he admits that he set up Namatame by giving him the idea to shove people inside the TV when he called the police, concerned about the murders. He then admits that this was all very amusing to him, and that he's glad we caught on to stop the game from getting boring. Finally, he alludes to the slow combination of the 2 worlds, and that we won't even make it to the new year. After that, he reveals that he's actually somewhere else and casually leaves a portal to where he is, as if to taunt us. So, without further delay, we give chase to the bastard behind it all. Here we are, Magatsu Inaba, the final destination of our culminating journey. The world is twisted almost as much as the man who occupies it. There's not much to talk about concerning the area besides the fact that on floor 3, Adachi requires you to avoid encountering any shadows for no other reason than to spice things up. This heavily reinforces the precedent that he is reveling in the chaos he's caused, and looks at it all like some sort of twisted game to be played. This may remind you of Mitsuo, but unlike him, Adachi is showing no signs of anything remotely human, whereas at least Mitsuo had some grounds within his insanity. Anyway, once we make it to the end, Adachi is waiting for us, and decides to give us a lecture about how the world's come to shit and that humanity turning into shadows would truly be freedom from the oppressive society we live in. Along with that, one of the most telling moments of his character is this.
Out of everything you could have been, didn't you specifically choose to join the police?
Don't make me laugh. Just because someone joins the police doesn't make them some kind of agent of justice. You know why I applied? So I could legally carry a gun. That's all. You'd be surprised how many are like that. I thought it would be fun too, but to tell the truth, that was a wash. Everyone around me was such an idiot. I made one tiny mistake, and they all got on my case and sent me out here to Nowheresville as punishment. I was bored shitless and wondering what to do next when I discovered this power.
For crying out loud! Why a bastard like you?
A gift for having to put up with this lame job out in Nowheresville, I guess. I did that stuff 'cause I could, and it got interesting, so I watched.
This is truly what makes Adachi one of the best characters of the game, as he's not just the perpetrator behind the crimes, he's an example of a toxic ideology that will consume you to the point where he commits such atrocities on a whim. We then fight and swiftly defeat Adachi, but it's not over quite yet, as a deity who reveals themselves as Amino Sagiri takes over his body to communicate the idea that mankind would be much happier in the fog, a fog where everyone is blind to the truth. We, of course, reject this line of thinking, and Amino Sagiri decides to test our will and fights us. Once defeating it, it tells us, for now, the fog will lift, as we've proven that a facet of mankind does not wish to live in ignorance, but warns us that at any moment it could come back to fulfill mankind's desire of illusion, if it becomes strong enough again. Everything is finally over as we drag Adachi out of the TV world after ignoring his plea to be left to die. Once we leave, the outside is bright once more, and thus, time moves forward until Christmas, where we all celebrate together, not only for the holiday, but also for the peace of mind now that it's all finally over with. We check the TV one final time, and sure enough, no one comes on as we've taken down Amino Sagiri. Time then passes yet again, and we celebrate the new year. However, when we pay a visit to the Velvet Room, we're informed of Marie's disappearance, and after a little talking, Margaret agrees to search for her. Anyway, one of the last winter activities we all do together is skiing, which Yosuke and Teddy come over to plan with us, but in a cruel twist of fate, we end up getting really ill for a couple of days, causing both the postponing of the trip, but also for Teddy to stay and watch over us. It's when we're sick when we see Marie saying her goodbyes in a dream. We then occasionally have dreams of the memories we've made with Marie, until it's eventually time for the ski trip, which goes by smoothly up until the last day, where us, Teddy, Yosuke, and Kanji get lost in a blizzard and find shelter in an old shack. It's in this shack that we notice a flash, and when we go to investigate in the most sus-sounding way fucking possible,
We have to find out, right, Senpai?
No! Sensei, stop it! You'll fall in!
everyone else finds us next to a TV. Anyway, we then go back and forth on whether we were seeing things or not until Chie finally decides to stick her hand in the TV and gets grabbed. In an attempt to grab her back, the rest of us also fall in to meet none other than Margaret, who informs us on Marie's disappearance. Firstly, it's not like the case that we've just closed, as instead of being forced, she came in here willingly. Second, the most likely reason for her departure is that she regained some or all of her lost memories and didn't like the outcome. And finally, we don't have much time to save her, as the hollowed forest will soon collapse onto itself, completely erasing Marie's existence, including all the memories we have of her as well. After some prep work, we go into the hollowed forest the very next day. Alright, before getting into the heavy shit, I may as well talk about the gimmicks that this dungeon provides, which I personally find very annoying. After every battle, your SP is halved, which really just requires you to use an item to teleport back to the front and heal up, then go back over and over and over, which doesn't really do that much for difficulty, but managed to be the biggest pain in the ass. Now that I've shit-talked the gimmick, I think it's only fair I talk about something I like, which is the gimmick of having to start from scratch with items and utility, which would be a pain if the items you were able to find weren't so goddamn good to the point you can cover your entire team's weaknesses. Anyway, I got a little sidetracked. Once we enter, I immediately notice the naming scheme of the floors are quite different from the other places thus far. The first one being Memories of Parting. On each floor, we also get to hear a poem from Marie, which will either foreshadow what's to come with her or reinforce parts about her departure we already know. The next floors are called Memories of Pain, Memories of Grief, Memories of Sorrow, Memories of Love, Memories of Suffering, Memories of Anger, Memories of Loneliness, Memories of Invitation, and finally, Memories of Meeting. On the Memories of Anger floor, we meet Marie, where she reveals that she fully intends on dying here, and calls this place her grave. This worries the entire party, and in an attempt to quell said worries, Marie reveals her true identity, Kasumi no Okami, and that she is just like the previous Sagiri we fought thus far, only taking a human form to subconsciously spy on humanity. Even with all of this information, we press onward. We then finally meet at the end of the dungeon, which ironically is called the Memories of Meeting. Here, Marie, yes, I'm gonna call her Marie since it's easier to say over and over instead of Kasumi no Okami, keeps on going on about how she needs to die here, this time explaining that if she doesn't, the fog trapped inside her will destroy our world. She then fights us to prevent us from doing anything, but she quickly loses the will to fight, and we convince her to release the fog and let us handle it. We then have to fight this deity who actually reflects literally all forms of attack except Almighty. Luckily, I actually bothered collecting break items, which make the boss temporarily vulnerable to certain attacks. Once defeating her, Marie returns to her normal self and we all book it out of there since the place starts collapsing, a concept Persona 5 would later shamelessly steal. Anyway, we finally go back to our world, and time passes along with new memories made in this time, until we're about to leave to go back to the city. It's here where Daddy Dojima tells us to say our final goodbyes to all of our friends before leaving, in which we do. Once we're done with that, we talk to Daddy Dojima and Nanako and are forced back home? Wait a minute. We can say no? After selecting that option, we're free to go wherever we want, and we head over to Junes to reminisce one final time. However, everyone else shows up too, and we have a fun conversation until Naoto mentions that even though the case is closed, she still feels unsatisfied with the lack of answers to where and how the Midnight Channel started, as well as how Namatame, Adachi, and even us got our powers from, without facing our other selves. This is where we remember we got a letter. And to everyone's surprise, it's from Adachi of all people. What's more important, however, is what is inside, detailing the same concern from what we've just had, but adding that there must be someone here who's behind it all, and they must have met us all. We then mull over suspicious individuals before we go searching, which leads us to Daddy Dojima and Nanako, as they may remember more about the day we came here than we currently do. Nanako then chips in that she remembers that we stopped at a gas station on the way home, and remembers the gas station attendant for being weird. After a little more searching, it seems no one around town remembers or has seen this gas station worker. So we head to the Velvet Room to tell Igor of our situation, who, impressed at our determination to find the truth, gives us the culmination of our journey thus far, the Orb of Sight. This gift then causes Marie to remember even more, with her ending up originally being a deity who fulfilled man's desire. However, she ended up split up after her desire to protect humanity and the one to fulfill its wish started conflicting with one another. Anyway, once leaving the Velvet Room, it starts raining outside. And when we pass the gas station, there she is. When we talk to her, she at first feigns ignorance, then throws away the charade once she can't sway us with words. She then reveals herself as Izanami. She tells us that she is the one who both awoke our power and created the Midnight Channel, and beckons us to try and face off against her before leaving our sight. This is where everyone else arrives and we recap what we've got before heading into the TV to gun straight for her. We're finally here. The real final frontier. Though it is a shame that, besides the occasional taunt, the final dungeon isn't really that interesting. But while I'm on the subject, I'd like to praise the game for making a dungeon appear unique, even with essentially the same structure. In a lot of dungeons, the design really overshadows the really repetitive nature, and the fact that these dungeons are very digestible helps a lot as well, with them usually being only about 10 floors to the top, spread out across multiple areas instead of the same boring 264 floor hell that calls itself Tartarus. Anyway, back on track. Shit doesn't really get real till we meet the final boss. Once we meet face to face, she reaffirms what we already know and taunts our apparent foolishness yet again before the fight starts. Things go relatively smoothly until we finish off her health bar, but then becomes impervious to damage. But something here isn't right, and after reaching for the Orb of Sight, we peel away at yet another falsehood and reveal her true form, Izanami no Okame. We then do our thing, but when we're just on the cusp of victory, she drags all of us, one by one, into the horny realm. We then hear the voices of everyone you form true bonds with, and with a new sense of undying determination, we finally awaken to our ultimate persona, Izanagi no Okame. We then come back, and after getting slapped around a little bit, we refuse to avert our eyes to the truth, and in doing so, no longer need the glasses to see, as finally, we decide to end it once and for all, by the myriad truths. She then spouts off the same shit before eventually succumbing to her defeat. When she falls, the fog of deceit not only lifts in our world, but also lifts in this one, too. And it reveals a beautiful landscape. A true reflection of the pure hearts, without the corruption known as illusion or lies. We then finally depart the next day, taking the whole year's experience with us, and knowing that we will continue finding the truth of our lives wherever we go. This is Persona 4 Golden. A game that I severely underestimated based upon a negative first experience entirely due to my own faults. But after replaying it, I can confidently say that this game, with its many faults included, is fucking fantastic and deserving of all the praise it gets. So, if there's anything that you want to take away from this video, please don't have it be my shitty jokes. Instead, take away that you too can find your own truth, as fucking cliche as that sounds. Anyway, that sounded like a cute ending, right? Well, too bad, I've still got to review the characters, so you guys gotta keep watching this shitty video even longer. Fuck you too. Alright, before we go on to the next section of the video, let me clarify at the start that I'm going to be going over the social links of only the most important characters of the game, including the entire party and some others who are essentials of the story. This part will also delve into each member of the investigation team and their respective personas. Starting off, we have the main character, as well as the holder of the Fool Arcana. His arcana being the Fool really doesn't have that much of a deep meaning. It's just used to symbolize the Fool's journey, where our main character ends his journey not with the power of the Fool, but with that of the world. Anyway, he has some interesting personas to discuss, with Izanagi being the one of main interest. Izanagi is a very interesting choice for the main character's persona, as it is a counter to the final antagonist of the game, Izanami. According to Japanese mythology, there is a part of Izanagi's story where he descends into Yomi, or the land of the dead, to retrieve Izanami. And when he finds out that he cannot take her back due to her taking food cooked in the furnace of the underworld, he breaks the promise he made to not look at her and finds her her as a rotting corpse. This has very clearly influenced the game's implementation of these characters as the main character, and by extension, Izanagi yearn for the truth, whilst Izanami wishes to hide some unbearable truths behind darkness. There's also the fact that in the game, the true form of Izanami reveal does look quite a bit like a corpse, as that is the cruel truth that both Izanagi and our main character reveal. Izanagi no Okami is Izanagi's full name, which again connects with our theme of finding the truth, as once we're able to grasp it, we get the full truth of Izanagi's name, along with a newfound power. Next, we have Yosuke of the Magician Arcana, with his persona, Jiraiya. Unlike the main character, Yosuke has a defined personality and, well, a social link too. So let's hop into that first. In his social link, Yosuke slowly learns to face the more toxic sides of himself, the ones that culminate in feelings of jealousy and even rage to an extent. He feels an extreme isolation, being an outsider to Inaba, and thus never feeling comfortable or accepted there. This culminates in a fight between him and the main character, where he insists he'll finally beat these feelings out of him. While they're both lying on the ground, Yosuke is finally ready to move on from these feelings, and comes to accept the goods of his town he's been willfully ignorant to. Yosuke's persona is based off of the shape-shifting ninja Jiraiya. In Legends, it's said that Jiraiya would transform into a gigantic toad quite often, which may seem irrelevant, but when you find out the story of the frog in the well from Chinese folklore, it actually makes a little more sense. The story follows a frog who refuses to leave its well, despite knowing of grander opportunity outside of it. This could apply to Yosuke, as the well of his story could be his old city, and him refusing to leave it mentally and accept where he is now to make the best of Inaba, being the great beyond equivalence of the story. We also have his arcana, which is that of the magician, which represents potential among other things, with potential relating to Yosuke's standing with how he has all this potential. It's just that he needs to break out of this well that he's found himself trapped in. Wow, that was a lot. Anyway, as a reward for sitting through that, why not have a little fun fact? Did you know that Yosuke was originally supposed to be a dateable option for our main character? There are even some unused audio files as well as some code remnants suggesting a romantic relationship between Yosuke and the main character. Here, take a listen.
I never knew I had such heat inside. Don't make me say stuff like that. Don't go. I like you.
Anyway, all of this information kind of puts some pieces together regarding his tendency to lash out about, anything relating to homosexuality throughout the entire events of the game. With this new context, it makes sense, as he would be aggressive toward gayness in order to hide a little of his own. However, for whatever reason, this was scrapped. With that out of the way, Chie is our next contestant, being the one of the Cherry Arcana with her persona, Tomoe. Chie's social link follows her trying to get stronger in order to protect others, and throughout learns that she can't possibly do everything alone. She then accepts this, as along with helping others, she learns to be helped when needed as well. To be honest, some of these stories aren't very long or hard to describe, so I'll just move on to her persona. Tomoe is a figure of Japanese literature, where she was a female samurai and leader of many successful warring campaigns. It makes sense that this figure would represent Chie, as, like Tomoe Gozen, she wants to be a powerful figure under which those can be protected under. Her arcana is that of the Chariot, which represents aspects of control, guidance, victory, and friendship. These qualities can easily fit with the current narrative of her story, with control, guidance, and victory being aspects of her resolve in protecting others, culminating in her deciding to become a police officer, and friendship being what she wants to protect, but also what helped her realize her full potential to do so. After that, we have Yukiko of the Priestess Arcana, and her persona, Konohana Sakuya. Yukiko's social link follows her story about her breaking out of what she deems her pre-chosen decision to inherit the inn. We follow her throughout as she tries to learn new skills until eventually she tells everyone at the inn that she plans on going somewhere else with her life. To her surprise, instead of the harsh reaction she expected, she was met with unconditional support, which causes her to question decisions once again, until she chooses to stick with the inn, but this time by her own decision, as she was only running away for the sake of feeling free when, in truth, she always was. Her persona, Konohana Sakuya, is based off of the Japanese goddess Konohana Sakuya Haim, who is a symbol of delicate life. This may seem odd at first, however, Yukiko does reflect these characteristics as, like the goddess, she's often portrayed as kind or empathetic to those around her, and especially one who cares about the lives of others, as throughout the social link she's shown to care deeply about the other staff of the inn and what they think of her. The Priestess Arcana symbolizes stillness and passivity with an emphasis on reflection upon your current situation. I can safely say that this fits the bill for Yukiko, especially the reflection part. She displays these characteristics throughout her journey to figure out where she wants to be in life. Yo, 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 it's Kanji time, baby! Yes, this is my favorite character of the game, how could you tell? Anyway, his persona is Take Mikazuchi, and he is of the Emperor Arcana. Kanji's social link explores him and his connection to his feminine hobbies. He pushed away from his image in fear of harassment. He slowly starts opening up about his knack for sewing, when we then spot a little boy who borrowed a stuffed bunny that got thrown in the river by bullies, so we decide to look for it with no luck. Kanji reveals a bit of hidden kindness within him when he tells the kid that he'll make another one for him, and he comes back with 2 the following meeting. One for the kid he borrowed it from, and another for the kid himself. Of course, Kanji expects to be ridiculed and demeaned, however, he's caught off guard when the kid praises him and calls him cool for making the dolls for him. This leads to more meetups where more people connected to the kid want some dolls too. This all builds up to the scene where we're talked to the police because there are reports of bullying and they immediately suspect Kanji based upon his past behavior. However, while this happens, the kid from earlier pulls up and vouches for Kanji's good deeds, making him admit who he is in front of everyone. Later, when we talk to him, he laments over what his late father told him on his deathbed, which was along the lines of being a true man. For a long time, he was angry about this statement, but he thinks he finally knows what he meant by it. For Kanji, being a real man means 2 things. 1, to accept yourself for who you are, and 2, to get others to do the same. To me, the social link is powerful not only because I personally relate to it, but also because of how complex and real his struggles feel throughout the story. With the culmination of him coming to terms with the part of him he hid away for so long, the most satisfying payoff in the game. His persona is based off of the Japanese mythological figure who shares the same name. He's considered a god of thunder and sword as well as known for bravery as a quality. This is what I want to focus on, as I believe that this trait is mainly what Kanji inherits, as his social link is all about being brave enough to face himself, and more importantly, having others face who he really is. The Emperor Arcana reinforces this, as it typically represents strength and assertiveness among other things. This, of course, ties back into getting others to acknowledge him, especially with the assertiveness characteristic. Right after my boy Kanji, we got fucking Rise. Anyway, Rise's persona is Himiko, and her arcana is that of the lovers. Rise's social link is about how she feels about her idol life and how she wants to escape it before eventually returning to a little girl who, inspired by her, bettered herself. When she sees this, she gains the motivation to return to idol business to hopefully be a pillar of light to others as well. While being a pretty nice story, I guess, I personally found it boring, especially when it mimics Yukiko's story with the whole, I want to leave, wait, never mind aspect. Also, I just personally find her to be extremely obnoxious, in fact, more so than Teddy and Morgana combined, and I will stand by that statement. With my bitching out of the way, her persona Himiko is based off of the historical figure who shares the name. However, legends detail a power over death she apparently had. This could be a tie-in with death being the literal counterpart to Rise's symbolic ends throughout her story, with major life decisions filling her mind. In regards to her arcana being the lovers, it usually signifies cohesiveness or parts that work well as a whole coming together. This makes sense as throughout the game, not only does she navigate for the team and be that force that helps keep the team close, but also her motivations to continue living as an idol, which was to inspire and bring people together. For our final party member, we have Naoto, and oh boy do we end off on a strong note. Naoto Shirogane's persona is Sakuna Hikona, and her arcana is that of the fortune. Naoto's social link focuses on how she will move forward as a detective and as a woman. As stated before, she would hide who she was in fear of discrimination based solely off the fact that detective work is a male-dominated field. Throughout the social link, we help her with a mystery set up by her grandfather involving detective tools she handcrafted to remind her of why she wanted to become a detective and to help motivate her to move back into the profession she loves. This is a truly amazing social link, as not only does it focus on the personal, but it also has some time to make a statement indirectly about the system as well. The story encourages you to think about these situations and just how unfair they are, but also not to dread them, as that'll get us nowhere close to it changing. For me at least, this is a bit of a taste of what would later be the sole focus of Persona 5, which heavily encourages the change of society and its norms for the better. Naoto's persona is based off of Sukuna Bikona, who is known as a deity of art, agriculture, healing, and knowledge, among many other things, including hot springs, funnily enough. The knowledge part sticks out to me the most, as by nature of Naoto being a detective, she matches this quality pretty well. There's also the healing aspect, which I personally believe comes through with her healing her passion for detective work. Although that one may be a bit of a stretch, her arcana is that of the fortune, which is described with symbols of luck, fortune, and opportunity. Opportunity is by far the most apparent one on the list, as Naoto's character and journey is defined by what opportunities she seems to have lost, and her taking them back along with control over her own life. Now we've got our non-party social links, and it looks like we've got a double whammy with both Nanako and Ryotaro Dojima. Daddy Dojima, that's because, you know, that's what I've been referring to him the entire fucking video. Anyway. Nanako's social link is about her mother's passing and how she feels neglected by her father since he spends so much time at work that she rarely ever sees him. Dojima's social link ties in with Nanako's by explaining why he's always at work, since he's never gotten over the hit-and-run incident that killed his wife and Nanako's mother, to the point where he spends nearly every waking second grasping at straws trying to get a new lead, but ends up neglecting Nanako in the process. This whole thing comes to an end where, after enough talks, he finally accepts this problem and decides to not only become a better father for Nanako, but also a better detective. Finally, we have Adachi, whose social link is mainly a hint at his ideology, where he constantly goes on and on about the pressures of society, but in a way that still masks his true feelings. What we do have is quite interesting though, as when you finally uncover his true identity, you have the choice to confront him alone, in which the social link changes from the jester to the hunger, symbolizing an uncovering of his facade or jester arcana, to see the ugly truth that is the hunger, which in this case symbolizes a sort of greed or overindulgence, akin to gluttony. Oh, Jesus, fuck. That was a lot. That was a pretty big video, and I spent a fuck ton of time working on it. So, you know, I'd appreciate if you guys show me some support in the comments, please. It took fucking forever to make. Anyway, I can't believe this is done, really. I want to thank everyone here, you know, for watching all of this, because, you know, it's a pretty long video, but I've spent countless hours working on it, and I truly appreciate, you know, everyone who makes these hours worth it. So I want to get that out of the way. I guess a bit of an apology for not uploading for probably about 3 months, I'd say, for when I plan to, you know, upload this video. So yeah, sorry about that. And yeah, I guess expect just content. No, not really an upload schedule anymore, as I want to focus on making more higher effort content rather than more consistent content. So, you know, that's a whole thing now. Anyway, I guess I'll just end this like usual. Well, this has been Weibo. Thanks for watching my shitty contents, and peace.